Yeah, it's funny. There are a number of podcasts that I listen to where I feel like because of that sort of inherent beginning where it's people are just chit-chatting, there are a lot of podcasts where somebody's like, "Oh, have we started?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, right. You've been recording this whole time and they aren't clear when the start is."
I used to like as you just learned, I'm still figuring all this out even though I've done so many. I never like it takes so long to instill new like tactics. But I just when I was first starting out of like being a pure novice, I would kind of forget to introduce people and we would just start talking. And I kind of thought it threw me off in a way, and I wondered if the guest felt that way too. But then I got, maybe not a bunch is generous. I got a bit of feedback from people saying they liked that it felt more just like listening to some friends talking when it just sort of started out of nowhere, and then people kind of wonder like what were they saying before like we were in this conversation. So I kind of pivoted. I didn't change anything, but I pivoted the thought behind it. Like before I thought I didn't like it, and now I do like it. And if people want to think it's a strategy, like that's great. I think my entire life actually is just doing weird things that I think might work, and then people attributing those to actual like smart decisions, like marketing or whatever. Like I didn't think that would be the best way to start a pod, but people started saying it was a decent way, so I'm leaning into that instead of getting any better.
It's interesting. There's a great essay by Stephen Shore about these. He's comparing these two paintings, and one of them, and kind of the distinction between them and how they relate to photography. And one of them, he says, is much more like related to or inspired by, or maybe not inspired by, but is more just sort of photographic. And he says part of the reason for that is that there are things that exist on the edges of the frame and are cut out. Like there's a tree that's kind of growing out of the edge of the frame, and so you only get part of it. But because of that composition, it suggests that the image of what you're seeing is part of a bigger world. Like it exists within the frame of the world. Like you can imagine that the world continues beyond the frame. And in some ways, what you're talking about with the podcast is the same thing, right? Is that this conversation exists within a grander sort of conversation, and that it's not sort of an isolated or segmented piece.
Yeah, that's so smart. And I admit, I'm gonna look so foolish, but I've never really even thought about that until you're saying it. Like in a photo, I feel if you can see, like I typically shoot my photos with a bit more background than needs to be, and then most of the time don't even like crop in. But now I'm thinking about it, like if you can see what's there, it's kind of definitive. Like you can't really imagine what might be there because you can see what's there and there's proof. It actually would be a lot more interesting to crop closer and then have people kind of form their opinions about what might be outside the frame. I'm gonna keep that. I love Stephen Shore is one of my like favorite people of all, like I obviously don't know him, but favorite people to admire, and I've never read any of his writing.
Oh, he has a book. I think it's called Modern Instances. There's a bunch of essays. It's really good. I really like it, I guess. And I think even though I think a lot of it is written around a sort of a different era of photography, I find it still quite relevant.
I'm gonna look for it immediately after this. That's kind of my next Saturday to do is to find this book.
I I think they have a copy of it at Magpie because I used to work there and I ordered a copy in and I don't think it's sold. So.
Perfect. Maybe I'll give him a call right after. That's easy. So what we're actually just no, yeah, let me revert because I have you here, someone who actually will have an answer to this based on their knowledge of photography. I was just talking to a friend of mine about I've been shooting photos forever and I really don't understand or have ever considered the crop of a photo.
Hmm.
So recently I forget, Sarah and I watched a documentary about the kind of fashion industry in the 90s. It
Hmm.
got me really into a bunch of stuff, but I guess specifically Vogue issues from then. So I went online, found some issues, been looking for them thrifting and that type of stuff, and I find every photo is cropped super close. And it made me think why? And it might be because of what you just said, Stephen Shore said, but what do you know about I guess better question, how do you crop things and then what's your logic for that crop? I don't even understand when I watch movies that look a certain way, I've never really thought about why, but then you look into all the behind the scenes stuff and YouTubes and the podcasts about it. And everyone is always mentioning oh, that was a 9 by 16 crop and they went a bit closer because that showed so and so and that evoked this emotion, and these are things I've never thought about but I guarantee you have. So can you, me being totally novice, just teach me a bit about this, please?
That's so interesting. I don't think of you as a novice. I guess I would start there. Um, and it's I I wish I had like a more kind of instructive answer, but the way I always think about it is like when I'm shooting, somehow it's okay. This is the sort of metaphor that I always think of is, do you remember those games from when you were a kid that was like a wooden box and a maze and a marble, and you're trying to like turn two knobs to sort of change the slant to get the marble through the maze without it following in any of those little holes?
Yeah.
That's like how it feels to me, is like I'm slowly trying to like feel my way through something by moving slightly one way or the other until suddenly something just locks in. And I don't know that I can articulate it, but all of a sudden something you'll just know when, or I'll just know when something feels right. And which is equally frustrating when I can't find it, right? When like sometimes there'll be an angle and you're just like, God, this is just wrong, and I can't articulate why it's wrong, but it just feels off. Um, which I think is half of the answer, right? Because that's like when you're actually looking through the lens. Um, and and that's just like one version of cropping, like which is like is in real time and real perspective cropping. But then the other half, and maybe this is the half that you're talking about, which is cropping an image once you've taken it. And that one I feel so like sort of mixed about. I know a couple of photographers who kind of refuse to ever crop their images. They will always sort of keep whatever is in the frame, and consider that to be part of whatever, almost to trust the instinct they had in the moment as opposed to the one they have after the fact. Whereas, I interviewed a photographer named Matthew Genetempo last year, maybe the year before, about his new book, and we were talking about this one image in the book that is um, it's a book about a, a sort of a group of young men in, okay, I now can't remember the city in Texas, but who are kind of, I don't know, a bit wayward, I suppose. And he has this one photo in the book that's quite striking, and it crops this portrait of one of the young men kind of just at the eyes. I can't remember if it's above or below, and it's quite affecting. And I asked him about it, and he said, what's funny is that photo is actually much bigger. Like there's more in the frame, and it wasn't working. And it wasn't until I cropped it there that that it unlocked something. And I think. what's kind of common to both those answers is that it is kind of a intuitive trust almost, like I think somehow you know when something is working in an image in a way that you can't always articulate, but it like turns something on or it clicks in some way. And so that's kind of I just trust that instinct.
That's I think one of my main problems is that I was kind of, or no one was, maybe am set in my ways of the way I take photos, but I have no explanation or logic behind it. Like, I definitely can't articulate why I do things this way. And to be honest, I think that the reason I do them that way is just because that's how I would do them. So I didn't really crop. I always used what was in the frame, but I don't really have a reasoning for it. Like, I don't stand by that. And I wouldn't like say that's how I take photos. Like, that's my style. I guess it ends up being a style, but it's not really by choice. It was almost just by like doing it and then not putting in any effort to change it. And lately I've been actually probably thinking about photography the most I ever have. And I'm thinking it's time to learn a bit of the rules and a bit of like why things are done the way they're done. I've done this as a hobby forever, but I can't really explain any of it, and I kind of want to be able to.
That's so interesting. I feel so mixed about I tend to reject rules when it comes to stuff like especially when it comes to any kind of creative practice, but I understand the impulse at the same time, and I understand that sometimes we want to understand why something works. But an editor named Adam Moss. He published that book, work. I think it's called Work of Art, and it was a series of interviews with artists. Maybe it was last year. Time has kind of lost all meaning, but and he was being asked about. He's kind of, I think, quite a renowned editor. He used to be the editor for New York Magazine, and was asked about his approach to editing. And one of the things he said is he just sort of really learned to trust his instinct or his response to things, like that if something that he was reading was producing sort of this bodily response, to trust it and to understand that that sort of response has value. And I think about that a lot because I think even if we can articulate some of the sort of rules about why photography is working, I think they are, I come from a place where I think that our body knows more about art than our brain does, and our body usually gets there first. And so if you have some sort of like electric response to something, that's to trust that instinct over whether you can sort of explain it or define it.
Yeah, that. I mean, if I could trust myself more, I would love to. Like, the idea is great, and it's funny you said you're not a fan of rules. I'm absolutely not. What I want to do is I want to know the rules so I know why they're broken.
Yeah.
Like, I want to not follow them, but if someone asks, I want to be able to, with a tiny bit of authority, say, normally it would be done this way, like in a textbook, or they would teach you this way, but I'm going against that to get this look or to evoke this like feeling through the image. And now I just sort of take a photo and then it is what it is. I just wish I could explain more, even explain why it's like going against everything. I figure it's time to learn a bit about the thing that I've loved for 20 years.
Are you hoping to like I guess I'm interested in this approach because I think it's possible that learning all those things will change the way you work, right? Like that your work will end up being different as a result. And I guess I'm curious, do you want to learn the rules to change how you work or just to kind of justify the way that you already work?
That's a very good question that I honestly don't know. let's say I'm not opposed to changing the way things are done as long as they the more I think about it, it's funny, I hadn't really even thought this much into it, but I really appreciate thinking about it a bit more. I I'm open to changing how things are done, and I'm also open to changing the results of how things are done. Like
Hmm.
I'm not really set in anything with my photos really. But you know what I will actually say is maybe I am looking to sort of change the type of photos I'm making because I mean, I'll be the first to say it, and I'm sure anyone agrees with me. I've been taking the exact same type of photos since I started taking photos, and I'm just kind of bored of my own stuff. It's like how many fences am I gonna see, and how many like shadows are gonna exist? I'm really into like actually taking the opposite type of photos I have for a while, and I don't. I mean, hopefully this doesn't sound arrogant at all. I mean this in like the most self-deprecating way possible. But I maybe got like decent at taking these kind of boring photos. And I like the idea of being like bad at photography again. So now I'm trying to like take photos of people because they're not good. And I have so much to learn and each one is bad, but maybe I like learn 1% of something from it, and it'll be a long time, I think, until they're even like decent. But I kind of like the fact that they aren't good. Like I don't even really want to show that many people yet, and I
Yeah.
like that as opposed to like it frustrating me.
Yeah, it's funny how I can really empathize with that feeling and knowing like kind of returning to that space of like beginner's mind, or beginner's approach where you are sort of being humbled by something that you've done for a long time and having to learn again. I find it very generative.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I love the idea. I think what I liked about photos in the beginning was that you're kind of competing with yourself to like make better photos, and I feel it was like one thing where I didn't really have to get good at this because no one asked me to do it in the first place. You know, it's not like a job that you want to improve your performance, or like a friendship or a relationship where you see things to be improved and they kind of need to be for the sake of that. This is like completely a hobby, like no money or anything is involved in it. So like I like being bad and then trying to improve just for the sake of self improvement. And then for a while I felt like I didn't really need to try to get better. And I don't mean that in the way that like I already was the best. Like they were still bad. It's just people knew that's what I was making. So like there were the people that liked them, and I would hear people like them and didn't really hear the opposite. Like even if it was only a few people liking them. But now with these new photos, I know they're not good, and I like that because it like forces me to get better at something purely for the sake of improving and not based on anyone else's like demands.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, you're making me really want to see the photos you're taking because I'm so curious about you're using the word bad in such an interesting way. And I'm curious what the sort of visual translation of that is.
Well, I mean, I'll send you some. I'm
Yeah, I'd love to see
very
them.
comfortable, and like I mean, Sarah sees them, all people see them. I just don't. I barely put photos online anymore, anyway. But these probably would not like be in a portfolio or anything like speaking for me until they were a bit better. But I do, I will say that the one benefit is when I take photos of my typical, like garbage bags, fences, all the like stuff that I'm bored with. When those don't work, they're essentially like completely useless to me. Like I'll get a roll of film back, and I mean I'll get 10 rolls of film back, and nothing works. And there's nothing really to do with the photos. I'll put them on a hard drive just to have them, but nothing is really gonna happen with them except it counts as practice. At least if I'm shooting photos of all of my friends and they don't like work like they aren't worthy print or any of that. At least I have a bunch of photos of all of my friends throughout the years.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. I had two sort of thoughts based on this. The first is like, have you ever thought about changing format? I'm assuming you're shooting a lot of 35.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about switching formats? Was my first thought, but then I also, what I'm assuming is tethered to that is like, I think I don't know if it's still part of your bio, but you used to sort of identify as a wheelchair user. And I wonder how much that influences the format you're choosing to work with.
That's interesting because I was just thinking about like there's so much pretty obvious things in my life that I don't really think about until one day I'm like, oh yeah, this has been happening all along. Like, why haven't I ever thought of it this way? So I know, like, you're talking about the format, but I'm also talking about like the eye line. Like being in the
Yes.
chair. All of my photos are from the same place, and I never really thought of that, even as a positive or a negative. I just didn't think about it being like a bit of a different view than like I mean anyone could crouch down or get on this level, but it's like I have a constant vantage point from that like 3.5 feet off the ground.
Yeah, this is kind of what made me think about your sort of interest in learning the rules, is that the rules are very sort of mobility biased, right? Like that they are like, and photography itself is very slanted towards the sort of traditionally able-bodied. And so in a way, I like learning those rules. Like that's why I think some of those rules are so stupid.
Yeah, they definitely like I mean, maybe they apply to me like they apply to everyone, but for sure, like, someone who, what, like, I'm kind of, my eyesight is where it is. Also, like, getting closer and further from an object depends on the ground in between me and that object. Like, sometimes Sarah and I will be out on a walk and I'll like see something, but it's not possible to get me any closer to that. And I've been using Zoom on some cameras, but I don't know something about it. Maybe this is also me not really understanding the like art form that I've loved for years. I never have liked Zooms.
I'm the same way.
But is that see okay, like me again, that's something I'm just like regurgitating. I don't really even understand why. Is there a like do you can you articulate more of a reason for you not liking them, or do you just you don't like them and it's that simple?
I really like constraint. And I think being a little bit limited in terms of those things. Like I basically only use prime lenses. And for the most part, I use like a 50. Because I have a Context G2 that doesn't have a 50, it has a 45 and a 90 and a 35. But that's kind of the area that I stay in, and I find I'll switch a lens and just stick with that for a while and kind of make it work or adapt to it. But I find more than anything, it's like I like having some sort of constraints on what I'm doing. I find that actually actually pretty useful. I find it generally useful with creative practice to have some sort of limitation.
Maybe another pro, like, do you always shoot on that G2? Like every shoot for the most part?
No, for almost all of my commercial work, I shoot that digitally, and then I have I have about 8 cameras I use for my own personal work, um, and I just bought a new one. So
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say I might maybe too many cameras, like an option paralysis type thing, because I have so many, and I have. I mean, I'm sure you do, and every photographer listening also has this sort of like sickness. But no matter what, like even if I got a new camera today, there will be a camera that I really want tomorrow. Like I'm
yeah,
always it's always like get a camera, love it, but then there's one thing it doesn't do, or one thing something else does better, and then instantly I'm like, oh, I need that, and they all like essentially do the same thing. Like I always it's like a running joke with Sarah and I. Actually, it's cool because I'll never forget this. But when Sarah and I first started dating, we were at. No one listening will know what this is, but you will. When McBain camera was at the end of White Ave,
yeah, right.
we were in there. I think I was buying film, and it was just when I was like learning. I think I might have only been shooting on disposables until
Okay.
then. And I had found out about like you should get T4s and then Olympus styles epics. And this is when that they were, I mean, T4s would have been affordable and Olympuses were like pretty much free at that point. And I asked the guy, have you ever heard of these cameras? Like, obviously, I was really looked so novice, like being in a camera store asking him. And he was like, you know what? We actually have one. He was like, this was in a display case forever, and it's never been used, but it fell out of the display case, and the battery pack or the battery door like won't close. But it was like
Oh,
like I don't even know if this was ever in our system. He's like, you can just have it.
oh
So he
wow,
like
that's remarkable.
that's how I got a stylus, and I wish like if I had stopped there and just like I still have it. I use it amongst other things, but if I had only ever shot that camera for all these years, I would probably know it so well. And I think I would like be able to get better results out of it. But because I'm always ping ponging between like 8 different cameras, I feel like maybe I don't know any of them as well as I should. I just know them all a tiny bit.
Right, right. You're making, I'm curious if, I'm assuming you have a huge body of work that nobody's ever seen, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, humbly, yes. I still like even now. I've been probably taking more photos than I have in a long time, and I just put them all on a hard drive. I'm about yeah. I mean, I don't know if anyone even cares, so I think it's probably fair to say I have a book release and a show happening at Soft Gallery.
Oh, you do?
It was supposed to be the end of this month, and I think we're gonna push it maybe to next month. But that's like not a huge book, but I think I'm trying for like 40 or 50 pages of like color stuff in a like perfect bound book instead of like a staple zine. I've never done a book before.
Which is funny because I feel like I so associate you with zines, and I know those are different, but like I think about you and that as related to that format.
That's the best compliment I've ever got, really. I would love to be thought of simultaneously with zines. I don't know if, I mean, Sarah might think of me that way, and maybe a couple of people, but it's really nice. You would, yeah, I've never done like a book before. I've never, maybe like, I don't want this to sound arrogant either. I've never like really taken my photos seriously enough to think they should be in anything outside of like a black and white zine, or I've framed a couple of things for a couple of shows, but like never taken it seriously enough to like do anything with. And I don't like, I still don't really take them seriously, but I'm interested in taking like the art form seriously, like making a book, because that's what photographers do. I don't think the photos are like elite or anything, but I want to present them in a good way.
That's such an interesting distinction. Um, how did you go about? I just feel like you're being really hard on your work, but that's okay. I totally get it. I think every artist is probably hard on their work, but I'm curious how you narrowed it down to a collection for this book, from what I'm assuming is a big archive, and given how you're thinking about photography right now.
I mean, pretty arbitrarily, to be honest. Like literally, I made a like a book, like the skeleton of the book in InDesign. When I would get like a few rolls back, I would just plug them in to that in a way that like kind of was cohesive at that point, like with the photos I was putting in, make them, like colors kind of matching or colors clashing, like pair stuff that way. And it's
Mm,
always like just two pages, so I really just try to like make those two interesting. I don't fact like I want the whole thing to sort of tell a story visually, but I more think of the juxtapositioning on each
mm.
spread
Oh, that's
instead of the
interesting.
whole thing. But then it'll change. Like I'll get four rolls back, plug a few in, then next month get some more film back, and then I'll go back in, and maybe a new photo looks better next to last month, so I'll like swap them, and
Mm,
then as we keep like pushing back the show, I just keep shooting photos in the meantime. So like I think originally it was supposed to be 28 pages. And then I was like, I have enough that I think I can push it to 40. And then at that point I'm just adding pages on InDesign and plugging them in. And then from 40, like we pushed the show another couple of weeks. So then I was like, well, I could do 48 now. And I mean, I'll just keep taking photos and plugging them in as long as we push it back, even though I would
mm.
like to. The way I work too is like none of it ends. Like I would just, if we kept pushing the show, I think it would be 60, 70, 100, like 500. It would just keep going forever. So I like maybe not the exact type of restraints you were saying you like, but I like deadlines in a way too. I like knowing like, okay, you have till this date, however many pages it is, then send it to the printer. But
Do you know the Japanese photographer Rinko Kawuchi?
yeah,
Okay. I think of her as like the master of the two-page spread. Like, I think they always feel cohesive within the larger book, but especially some of her sort of, I think, more famous square format books, they feel so much about like how two images across from each other are speaking to one another. Your description of how you're working makes me think of her work.
that's, I mean, my guess, not even my guess, I've seen it. And she is much better at photography and pairing than I would be. But yeah, I mean, the idea of it all making sense in the grand scheme is great, but yeah, I think them looking good side by side is probably what would take precedent for me.
Hmm. Can I ask a question? I feel like the way you're talking about your work is interesting. Like I feel like you're being sort of naturally hard on it, but I'm wondering where that sort of self-critique comes from. Like what makes you sort of make a distinction between your work and somebody else's, or as something that maybe is sort of not worthy of taking seriously, as you said.
I think I mean, like, great. That's a good question, a great question. Well, I think it comes from when I first was interested in photography before. Like, I mean, there are people ahead of me that would think my interests are too like digital, but I like blogs and websites and being able to look through like people's photos that way. And
Hmm.
when I could actually assess someone else's photos, it's purely comparison. It's like the way I think about my photos is based on the photos that inspired me to want to take photos, and
Mm.
then just me wanting to get that good, and
Hmm.
then like not being that good is sort of what makes me critique my stuff until it's that good. But it also, like, now, I don't want to be rude to anyone, but like Instagram, I don't necessarily compare myself to photos I see on there because you can't really assess them. Like I was saying, I think before we recorded, you can't like process these photos. So even though like obviously they're great, I don't really think like that's a good photo. I need to like compete or like live up to that. But the older, when I was just getting into photos and I would look through books and websites and all that, that's when I like started kind of comparing, or like, just almost the same way I think about my own spread. I sort of think about like, my photo juxtaposed with like another person who takes similar photos. Someone who I like admire their work and made me want to start taking photos. I don't like physically put mine next to theirs to see it, but I think of it that way. Like
Sure.
someone's photo like this, if mine was beside it, would it look kind of cohesive or would it be like really out of place? So it's mainly like 100% comparison and just like I know it probably sounds super unhealthy. Like to me, it's not that bad, but I'm always kind of comparing, thinking about what I like, and then just knowing I don't personally think I'm there yet, and then that's the thought behind it, and that's kind of the drive behind it as well.
Yeah, it's not that I'm not framing it as unhealthy necessarily, but I guess I'm always curious about, I mean, thinking back to your comment about wanting to learn the rules, and I wonder, sometimes I feel like there's a certain sort of I guess gatekeeping that can make somebody who's doing something interesting, but that maybe can't be sort of articulated through the lens of a certain sort of kind of authority in art or in creative practice, that diminishes how that work is viewed, even if it's good. And I'm wondering if your work is actually better than you're giving it credit for, but because you feel like you don't have that context to be able to talk about it, if that's the barrier.
I mean, very flattering to think it could be that, but I don't know if it. No, I mean, I don't know if it's better than I think it is. I also think that if I was to approach this differently, like imagine I think about like if I was content with all my photos, I don't know if it would be as fun competing with myself. And I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know if I would like go out and take. photo, especially certain photos. I don't think I would like be trying to compete with myself or try to live up to like other photographers if I flip the way I see it. So
Yeah.
I'm really content with thinking that way. And like when I said it was unhealthy, I just think about like if you had that approach to everything in life, then it
Right.
would be insane. I don't really think about like people, I don't compare myself to people in that way, and I don't think about like other things as critically. It's like mainly photos. I see it that way. Like
Okay.
so and so is so good. I want to be so good, and until then. I'm not gonna let up on myself, but I'm way more like gracious and lenient when it comes to other things. So I'm okay, maybe not okay, but I'm all right mentally.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny. The part of the reason I was thinking about this is I was just having a conversation with an artist who was kind of talking about new work they were making, and they'd come up through art school, and I, I won't put words in their mouth, but I got the impression that some of the sort of shaping around how art school makes you think about work had become a limitation on what they were making, and they were kind of just shaking it off, and it was kind of opening up what they could make free of the confines of having to, write a master's thesis about what it was. And I find that to be like kind of a common, um, maybe like not issue, but a common sort of factor in how people look at work, and maybe value it. And I was curious if there was some parallel there.
Again, like like I would love to say yes because then there would be more like meaning and substance to it. But I think yeah, it's as simple and kind of black and white as I'm making it out to be, but maybe it'll grow into like these more sort of sophisticated like thought process. Like
No, I
I hope one day I can kind of again like it not about I don't want to take my photos too seriously. I never do, but I would like to take the presentation of it and like the kind of information behind it more seriously.
yeah, that's such a I think I said this already, but I find that to be such an interesting distinction, and maybe um like a freeing one. Like I feel like I went through a period where I was almost taking my photos too seriously. And it to the point that I almost stopped doing it for a while, where I wasn't, I mean, I was doing it for work, but I wasn't doing it for any personal reason. And I think it was only once I could kind of free up what they had to mean, or free up where they had to go, or whatever, that um, I felt like I could do it again. And and it makes me think a bit about that distinction that you're making, of, and I think this idea of taking something seriously, or seriousness, is often um, given sort of value or priority, when in fact, like, not taking something seriously maybe sometimes is is a better approach, or more rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, I am. I'm sort of thinking about like, if I do continue down the path of giving this a lot more thought, I wonder if it is gonna change anything in a way I don't like.
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, that's when you were talking about wanting to learn the rules behind work, like one of the things I kept thinking about was like, that's great, but also like one of the tricky things about that kind of knowledge is that you can't unlearn it. And sometimes I have found that learning things, from a technical standpoint, while I do suddenly have some sort of foundation for how to think about something, I lose that sort of freedom of just doing something the way I want to, of in the healthiest way possible, of ignorance. There's this writer named Sheila Heti, and I was reading an interview, and she talked about she'll go through a draft of a book and then there will be something that feels too structured or formal, and she'll go back to an earlier draft and find a version like one of the early versions where it just has kind of a rawness or like a kind of an I guess authenticity is a silly word, but you like a I don't know, just like a kind of truth that comes from something being under edited that she really likes, and we'll bring that back in because that it's the kind of energy she wants. And one of the things I'm always sort of conscious of is not losing the energy that comes from just from not knowing and from as a result of not knowing getting to play.
That actually like totally brings up like the thought process of, yeah, like knowing too much about one thing might, yeah, like now I think I'm gonna put too much thought into my too much thought. But
Right.
knowing too much, I mean, knowing a lot is almost always good, but there are times where it's like that knowledge is almost kind of a burden. And maybe you're right, like, I mean, I guess you're not definitively saying this, but the thought could be right that if I know too many of the rules, but then don't want to use them anyway, it might make me think more negative. Like now, I wouldn't like it might sound like I'm negative about my photos, but I'm not negative about them really. I just like know they should be improved and then strive to improve them. I wonder if like knowing more about like how cameras work and why people do things, if that will shift it from just wanting to improve to like actually thinking negatively about them.
Yeah, it's I guess I don't feel like you're speaking negatively of your work. I like your work, and so I think I I I'm defending it, I suppose. Defending it to you, to the person that makes it, which is silly. But yeah, I don't have a concrete conclusion to that thought, but I'm not trying to suggest that you're being hard on your work necessarily. I mean, I guess I am in a way, but I'm just speaking from somebody who likes it and who enjoys looking at it as it is now. So
Thank you. I really appreciate that. When you like you're talking about taking a bit of time off like from personal photography, was that necessary? Like did you have to go away to come back type thing? Like did once you got back into it, did you find the break was needed and that helped you like rethink about it and then approach it differently this time?
yeah, it's a good question because I think I'm still in the coming back at the moment. And and I don't know where it's going yet. It feels like I'm trying to start from the beginning again. Like, and I think this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of like I feel like in some ways I had too much thinking to about my work to a degree that was almost sort of like a kind of paralysis. And I just couldn't I would be thinking about photos before I took them, which I find is to me is so destructive. Like I'm happy to think about work after I've made it, but and I guess more broadly, like I am the kind of I guess artist that I don't generate an idea and then go out and make that idea. I sort of do things for, I'll take a photo or make any kind of work because of an impulse. And it's only once it's done that I can reflect on what that impulse might have meant. But I think that that way of working doesn't necessarily suit the way that things are set up in the art world, at least in the city and in Canada. Like if you think about grant funding, like you just you can't just send in a grant application that says like, I want to trust my instincts and play for a little while. Can you give me $20,000 to do that? Like it's not going to happen, right? Like you have to have a kind of a concrete idea, appeal to a group of people that will analyze that idea and deem it sort of more worthy than somebody else's. And than determined to give you money, which I find is a for me a challenging way to work.
So I guess I have a question then. If like you have to think about your work more critically than I think about mine in a lot of instances, like grant writing, for instance. Like I know you put out many more books than I have. Does that change the way, like, if you're seeing it all from that like professional point, does that hinder any like fun and kind of like silliness behind it all? Like, does that make you like all business, or like do you still get to
I
have
mean,
fun?
yeah, it's a great question, and when I'm like I laugh because I worry about the truth of it, but I also think about it funny to think of myself as all business. But um, yeah, I think like lately, I think the answer for me has been twofold. What like, and maybe this is a longer story than any of your listeners care to sit through, but I'll try and make it concise. But I think about a decade ago, I started having sort of conversations with um, sort of curators and people in the art world about my work, and then starting to frame it through that lens. And that was never sort of my intention when I picked up a camera. Like I don't know that I had an intention. I just wanted to make things. And to me, those conversations started to kind of close in on something. They started to put a box around something that, as you said, was fun and free. Um, and it became the thing that kind of limited me. And I really care about sort of art and the arts and having both the opportunity for people to make creative work and the opportunity for people to see creative work. Um, but lately, I've sort of reshifted my focus in terms of what I'm sort of thinking about as kind of a professional art practice versus what I'm thinking about as stuff just for me. And a lot of the work I'm making now that I think of as like capital A art, I suppose, isn't grounded in photography, at least not exclusively. Like I'm doing a lot more sort of writing in that context and um, a lot more thinking about like systems and structures and processes. Like I have an exhibition at Latitude 53 at the moment that is much more about thinking about alternative models for arts funding, which sounds very dry, but I think it's more interesting than that. And that's kind of given me photography back just to do what I want to with it. So that's kind of how I'm refinding that play, I suppose.
It's really cool that I think like maybe not more than other people. I guess like I don't know about every hobby and every person, but it seems that photographers get to reinvent themselves in a good way, like more than the average person might. They get to reassess the way they do things and like come back differently,
Hmm.
or they can try new things or even like get new cameras. I feel that is like an interesting change that maybe not every subculture would get to be a part of as much.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes if it's a product of like the sort of like the speed at which photography works, right? Like you can experiment and see the results of that experiment relatively quickly in a way that like, a writer can experiment if they want to experiment with the book, but that's like a couple years of their life kind of minimum. And there is that gift in that sense that photography is, even if like a whole body of work takes a long time, like playing can happen quickly.
That actually probably different than what we've been talking about, but I'm really interested in like your kind of personal approach. Like if you were, I assume as I'm asking, I'm realizing every project would probably be a bit different, but how do you feel about like if you're making a photo book or like putting together a body of work, is it important to you like that it all be shot on the same film or with the same camera? Like how much variety in these images are you okay with?
Yeah, I camera wise, like the distinction I really make is that like for me, almost all of my commercial work at this point is digital, and everything that is for me or as part of like an artistic practice is I shoot on film. Um, and I don't know that I have a like an easily articulatable reason for that division, other than like the way that I work with film makes it feels sort of truer to what I'm trying to achieve. Um, and when it comes to sort of commercial work, I find that A, budgets are a different factor. And B, it just a lot of the work I do, there is just a level of convenience to working digitally that is kind of hard to turn away from. Um, like I've been working on a project right now that I've been on a sort of without knowing it, I've been working on it for almost a decade, which is that I've been shooting forest fire smoke over the Rocky Mountains. Often because Jordan's family lives in Kelowna, and we will drive back and forth in the summer, almost every year, at least once, or we'll go to the mountains here. And I will always from the car take photos of the smoke over the mountains. And because I didn't know that it was a project when I started doing it, some of them are in color and some are in black and white, and almost all of them are in 35 millimeter, just because that tends to be what I have with me. But um, they they feel cohesive, but they also are clearly a progression, which in some ways I like too. I like the idea that it is a project that has evolved and that evolution sort of exists within the project itself, within the format.
Yeah, I'm always like setting up these like totally arbitrary rules where I'll be putting a book together and then like there's one photo I have that I think would fit, but it's on a different camera. Like even they might be all 35 millimeter film, all the same film, the same everything, just in a different camera. And for some reason, to me, it doesn't fit. And then I'll tell Sarah, and then she always says, like, no one, the only one that even knows this rule is you. Like, you've made this up and you're abiding by it, but no one has any idea that that would be the rule. Now, it makes me wonder if other people are that, like, set in their ways, I guess, and like try to do each project with a certain camera, or like, sometimes I want to do all photos that are local, even though no one would know where they are. Like they're all kind of like abstract street photos. They could be in any environment anywhere in the world, but if it's outside the city, it doesn't feel right to me. But
Hmm.
that's again like something I've imposed, and no one knew that rule existed. I'm the only one enforcing it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder, like, in some ways, I think that still, if it matters to you, then that's okay. Like, in the same sense that I think sometimes constraint is valuable. I feel like it's like a part of your like artistic intention.
It's just so funny because I wouldn't even like it wouldn't be in the like intro or in the editor's note or anything. Like I wouldn't even voice that this was the imposed direction of it. Just me knowing this photo is in Toronto, all the rest are here. Like I personally don't like that. And now, like, I realize I probably sound like the most neurotic, like, freak to all the listeners. I'm pretty normal, everyone. I just think this way about photo.
Um, no, it's funny. I'm trying to find. I cannot think of the photographer's name, but there's a photographer who's I think he's Italian, and no longer alive, but he used to take work very locally. Just in I think in his neighborhood, and like almost exclusively. You'd probably really like the work. Actually, I'll find it and send it to you. But I don't know that the sort of localness was something that was articulated about his work. I think it's just something that sort of becomes obvious when it's written about. But matters nonetheless to how he was making it. So I don't know that it has to be Anyway, it's just one of those things that if it's a value to you, maybe it's a value to how you think about the work.
Yeah, when I was younger, I remember like falling in love with zine making, and there was never any restrictions really. It was just like, I would like shoot photos wherever I was until I had enough to make something with. And I remember like that kind of being the most fun I had with photos and self-publishing. And then the more I learned, it got not unfun, but maybe like slightly less fun. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that this might be like a perfect kind of precursor to me learning too many of the rules and then that taking another couple percent of fun out of all of it.
Right, totally. Um, yeah, I'm always fascinated by that distinction, because I think that there are so many people who get into some sort of kind of art making for the love or passion for it or whatever it is, and then once it becomes something that you are invested in a way beyond sort of I don't know if the hobby is the right word, but where you're trying to make something of it that can be generative or lucrative or garner an audience. There is this trade-off, it seems, where the even if you still love doing it, there are parts of it that become a labor in a different kind of way.
I feel that a lot of things I do in life, like I love them all, but they have become sort of like even this, like I absolutely love doing the podcast and like talking to someone every week is so beneficial outside of the pod. But even that feels like it's become sort of I mean it's a full-time job. I don't really get paid for it yet, but even that has lost like just a very tiny bit of like the whimsy because I like have to do it every week.
Right.
But again, it's one of those things that no one asked for this. I don't technically have to, but I've imposed on myself that it's gonna be once a week, and I do have hopes of it maybe making a bit of money and being able to be a job at some point. So
Yeah.
I stick to the one a week, but sometimes it just feels like I love like 90% it's the greatest thing, but that 1% it's like it's summer now. I would like to be outside on Sunday and maybe not like editing all this, but yeah, I feel like too many things go that way for me, and I wonder if like learning more about all the photos is gonna make it another, like slowly losing that like whimsy and like fun. Not entirely, but like 1% less fun. That's still a lot of fun to lose.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like it's funny because I'm so far from my sort of like formal education at this point that I think I've allowed a lot of that stuff that I doesn't like that I don't benefit from to kind of sort of wash away. Um, so it's quite far in the rearview mirror for me, but I guess I'm curious to see what happens for you, like as you learn these things, what the outcome is. Just having sort of gone through it for myself.
Yeah, I'm very curious too. I guess we'll find out together. Maybe not exactly together, but you'll see it shortly after I see it.
Yeah, what are you like where are you going to learn these things? I'm curious. Like what are your sources of um sort of sources of education?
I mean, I asked you. I asked. I had dinner with Jan the other night, and I asked him about cropping. I'm asking. I know a lot of very talented photographers, so I'm kind of picking their brain in real life, and then um like kind of look at examples, like see stuff online, kind of like try to assess what they've done and what could be done. But I guess like I mean without school, I definitely don't want to go down the route of like the internet telling me, I don't want to like ask Google or I don't want to like look on TikTok or Reels like about how to crop fashion photos. You're definitely gonna learn the wrong stuff that way. So
Mm.
like pretty much I guess asking people I admire in real life.
Oh, that's great. I'm curious what Jan said.
His, I mean, I think he would be fine with me airing this out. His answer, I think, was a lot more like just to the point and basic. He said like fashion photos like crop because like a page in a magazine costs so much.
Mm.
They want to take up the most space possible and like not have people like trying to they squint and like look at what the photo is of. They kind of want to make it as obvious as possible.
Mm. It's a much more practical answer than mine. Sorry.
I mean, they're actually both great answers and both like factor into the way I would think about things. So it'll probably take me longer than it would if I was just able to find all the answers like on the internet. But I think I'll get way better answers from people I look up to. So even if it takes a bit longer, I think all the like in the end, all the intel that I'm able to compile will be a lot like from experience or from the heart from people, and it'll mean more to my like final assessment and approach of things if I hear it like straight from people who know what they're talking about and people who I actually want to like seek the information from.
One, I'm going to say two things. One is that I think one thing that you might find really useful is just to find a photo that you are interested in playing with and crop it a bunch of different ways and print off those different versions and just sit with them and see which one ends up doing something for you. Um, because I find it like sometimes it is just actually like going through it over and over again where you find the language that suits you or that you respond to. Um, but the other is there is this photo editor named Emily Keegan, and she has a few of these sort of interview videos about um, layouts and especially for magazines. And I found it so interesting. I'll send a link to one of the YouTube videos, and you can go down a rabbit hole from there. But she does this analysis of Annie Leibovitz's work, specifically I think her work for Vanity Fair. I can't remember though. Oh, no, maybe it's for Vogue. But the way that she talks about specifically a layout um, for a magazine and how good Leibowitz is at that, I found very instructive. And I'm kind of one of those people that I find that I really loved Annie Leibovitz's work at one point, and feel like I find that she's struggled as she's moved sort of into the digital realm, which is just my opinion. Other people can disagree, but yeah.
I guess I also was kind of talking about all the internet as bad. I do definitely watch older photographers that I really like. I will watch their YouTubes and learn from there. Like, I'll watch like Gary Winogrand,
Mm,
Dino Moriyama, any of his old stuff that has made its way to YouTube. That's a good learning like a process. And then Kanopy has a ton of like videos I get on there from Sarah's University passwords,
mm,
and they have like so many old documentaries about like all the and there are like good modern photographers for sure. This is like a bit pejorative, but I don't necessarily like I would rather learn and like hear people in the 70s and 80s talk about their photos than hear like someone half my age like talking about what they're doing on
mm.
TikTok.
Yeah, yeah. Why do you think that is? I probably agree with you, but I'm curious where that comes from.
I just think that I mean, like, I guess this sounds funny, but this is true. Like, hearing them talk about it, like, you feel like an old video of Gary Winogrand talking about the way he takes photos. Like, that it's just so honest, and it wasn't for likes or for clicks or like paid content or anything. And now these days I feel there's a lot more of like that factored into information shared online. And also like like any like really handsome guy or any like attractive girl, they can like get on the internet, and I feel they can say anything like with authority and like poise, and then people are gonna like take that as fact. And I feel like a lot of the times it's either wrong, like I'll try things I've learned that way, and they're kind of like maybe not the best thing to be preaching. And then I'll try some stuff I hear like old photographers talking about, and that, oh, for the most part, will yield better results.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's funny. I was reflecting on our last conversation and sort of thinking about what we had talked about, or at least what I could remember we talked about. And I think very early in the conversation, maybe before we started recording, we were talking about nostalgia, and about the sort of nostalgic sort of nature of photos now, or relate, or sort of the draw that a lot of photos seem to have towards this kind of nostalgic feeling. And it's interesting the distinction between a nostalgia for aesthetic and a nostalgia for process, like thinking about how somebody worked uh, 30 years ago versus what a work looked like 30 years ago. And I wonder, yeah, about that distinction for you. How are you thinking about that distinction between like kind of longing for a way that people used to work versus longing for a way that an image used to look?
I kind of, I think about that like in the way that when these people were like taking photos, I was just talking to Sarah about this. Like I'm sure they did plenty other things like as part of being a photographer, but it seems like a lot of them would like put out one book every couple of years, maybe even longer. And that's sort of like, there was obviously no social media, but they weren't like selling prints on, like maybe they were, but there was no like aggressive pitch of all their other stuff. Now when I look at even like the least aggressive photographer like trying to promote their stuff online, they're always selling something, and they always have to be like making more money. So I feel like everything is a bit more like forced these days, and like with almost with like the audience in mind a bit more, like they're
Mm,
catering more to like what will sell. Like even if they're the most like nonchalant great like photographer, I still think maybe a bit deep down they're thinking like between these two prints what's gonna sell more, and they'll go with that. When I look at all the old photographers, it was feels to me more like exactly like someone trusted them enough to put a book out for them, and they chose all the images based on exactly what they wanted to be, and then put it out that way. It just seems like all the old stuff seems more authentic and more like from the heart, and more like selfish, maybe in a good way. Like they aren't thinking about exactly what people want to see, they're just thinking about what they can let people see.
it's curious. I wonder if how much this is a product of like in a changing economic landscape. Like people trying to make things that will sell is probably true. And then I wonder if it made me think like, oh, is this a product of the fact that, that everything is more expensive and everybody needs to make more money and everything
Yeah.
kind of is traded is traded for that at this point.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. And I should admit that I mean, things obviously cost more. Everything moves faster. Like, of course, people wanna learn. Maybe not even want to. I think people need to keep up with all that, especially like imagine. That it costs a lot to live here. What it would cost to live New York, LA, like where all the bigger photographers are. So I get that and empathize with that and sympathize for sure. But it just seems like everything is more like it's too quick too. Like I feel, Gary Winogrand put out a book, and you had years that you could buy it, look it over, like kind of like fall in love with the photos again. Like if you didn't like him as a photographer, maybe you would over the next year or two.
Mm,
Now I feel like people put something out and then no one has time to really like process it or even like miss that person as a photographer. Like it's a
right,
book,
right.
a book now, and then a zine next week, and then prints next week, and then a photo tee. Like there's just always so much stuff.
Do you, I wonder, I'm curious if there are contemporary photographers that you're looking at that inspire you or that look like the sort of future to you, the future of photography, I mean.
I don't know about the future because I just like I see too many images to really like slow down and think
Hmm.
about who's doing stuff right now that like would be sort of the future of things, but also I mean I could just slow myself down and do more research in that, so it like might be I can complain about the problem. I can also admit that maybe like it's on me for not looking at too much of it. I mean, there a lot of my favorite photographers are like not even alive anymore. Like
Right.
most of the people that I like look through their books and have them on my shelf, they're all like decades old, right? So there isn't. It's not that I don't look at modern stuff, but I'm a fan of. I mean, everyone likes these photographers, but I don't want to like say that like I still think they're amazing photographers, but like Jerry Sue, Ari Markopoulos, Peter Sutherland, like these
Yeah.
are the people I like, but I feel like also on the internet, these are the people that everyone is gonna say they like. But then I feel that taken away from them being really great photographers. Like it's not their fault that they like went viral on Tumblr and now everyone likes it. So
Mm.
I look at a lot of that stuff. I really like spontaneous photos are like that's why I love Jerry Sue. He, I think, once in an interview was talking about most of his process is waiting. Like he'll see someone walking down the street with like a bouquet of flowers, and then he'll just kind of like track them like with his camera until they're like dropping it or throwing it in the garbage. Or like he'll see a shadow from an awning like a block away and then just wait for this person to like go into that shadow. And
Hmm.
I don't know if I have the patience necessarily for all that, but I like the idea of it. Like the setup and like the anticipation of the exact frame is kind of the cool part. So I think that's what I look to when I'm looking for a photographer whose work I like. I'm also like really, even though I'm saying I'm into like portraits lately, I would like them to be as candid as possible.
Mm.
Like I would like to take photos of all my friends, and I like the idea that I've like gotten the kind of unwritten consent from them years ago to be photographing them whenever like I can take a photo of all my friends whenever and no one's gonna think it's weird. So I try to get photos of them, but have them unstaged. Like so that they, because when someone knows that a photo of them is taken, they look as good as possible and like they're aware of it and they try to like look like smile and look like they're in a photo. I'm not into that as much right now, which is a weird time to be into portraits and on stage photos. It's kind of a weird like juxtapositioning. But if I could take photos of all my friends without them being staged, that's ideal.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you. Like I find um I often say that like to me when I'm taking photos, I always want the act of photography to be the second thing we're doing. And the first thing is something else that's like engaging people's attention. Like I often think about it through the lens of a first date. Like I haven't been on a first date in a long time, but I feel like like sitting at a table across from somebody where all of the pressure is on having a conversation and getting to know each other is just so intense. Whereas if you're doing something else and the conversation is secondary and getting to know each other is almost secondary, it frees that up. It almost puts it in like peripheral vision and allows that to happen more organically. And I think the same thing about photography. I always want to be doing something else and taking photos while we're doing that thing as opposed to the active. It's a little bit why I hate working in a studio. I don't hate it, but I find that I have to think a lot differently in a studio because a studio so specifically says we are on a photo shoot. We are taking photos right now. That you have to kind of work within that dynamic.
Yeah, they. I mean, sort of along the same lines of like knowing too much about it might take a bit of the fun out of it. I feel like getting someone, like count three and then take a photo of someone, you're gonna get like, it looks too rigid, I
Yeah.
feel. And like a studio adds to that even more exponentially because you're controlling like the outfit and the lighting and everything like down to a T is like completely staged, which is like great for any of the other things that could go wrong with like a candid photo. But yeah, mine factor into me realizing I might not want to further my education about these things as I might get too in my head about all of it.
But I wonder if it's about furthering your education. God, I'm sorry that we're coming back to this. I feel like I don't, I'm like harping on this, but I wonder if it's about furthering your education in the direction that you want to go, right? Like, I think all of the photographers you just listed don't play by the sort of traditional rules of photography, but they probably play by some rules of their own, or have found ways to sort of make rules that suit how they work. Like I, it like a decade and a half ago, I spent a little time interning with a photographer in New York, and she's quite an energetic, candid shooter, and I think it started in sort of like a sort of a more kind of like a not street photography, but like shooting friends and being playful, and I think being exactly what you're talking about, and then kind of rose to fame fairly quickly. Well, probably not quickly by our standards, but I think to anybody looking from the outside, it probably seemed quick. Um, and was shooting sort of big celebrities in sort of on big sets and in dynamics, and I think had to figure out, okay, how do I keep the energy of and the playfulness to this work well without how do I within this new environment, and so I think for her learning how to make that work and to make it in this new context allowed her to keep working in that way and to keep sort of the spirit of the work that had made her sort of a success uh, present in what she was making. And so maybe for you, it is about figuring out not necessarily the rules, but rules that make sense for you and for your work.
And I mean, without naming names, did that it translate well for her? Like she excelled at the new style, like based on.
I have no problem naming names. Her name is Cass Bird, um, and I think it has almost become famous for that kind of like playfulness in her work and that kind of fun and spontaneity eh, to a degree that like she's with at least within the sort of photography world, and I think within the New York fashion world, is like quite famous now. And I think somebody that people like to shoot with or want to shoot with for that reason, because it does just seem like it seems like a couple of people are hanging out, but they also happen to be taking photos. And that's a hard thing, I think, to achieve with kind of the level of celebrity that she's working with now.
So there is hope for me.
I hope that's the takeaway from this conversation.
Yeah. No, that even if it shouldn't be that, that's what I'm gonna take away. Just continue with my like delusional photography outlook, and because she made it, maybe I can too.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like I think I think as you pointed out, I think it's important to sort of critique your own work and to always wanting to be improving, which is something that I feel as well. But I also think there is some level of sort of faith or trust in your own vision, even if you don't feel like that is felt elsewhere at the moment, that is kind of essential to kind of creative practice.
I mean, a ton to think about, but also all good things. And now I've asked someone who knows what they're talking about, someone I really look up to in photography. So
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
between you and Jan, I got a little more context to all this. That's awesome. I mean, I don't want to take up any more of your day than I said I would, but I haven't, like you talked about it a bit before. If you don't mind, I would love to know more about the show at Latitude right now.
Oh yeah, I would.
That's not the full impetus, but that was a part of why I thought we should do a new one right now while the show is happening, and then it's the last thing I bring up. But if you could tell us as much or as little about it as you want, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd be really happy to, partly to give the four artists that are in the show like a lot of love and attention because I really, yeah, I've come to sort of really care about them and care about their work. So I last maybe 2 years ago, but it was published at the beginning of last year. I wrote an essay, um, just kind of imagining an alternative form of arts funding. I think arts funding in this city, province, country is kind of in trouble, and I don't know. I struggle to see how a lot of sectors in the arts survive. And I also I I have a bit of and this is I don't have like a lot of data to support this. A lot of it's anecdotal, but I have a bit of an allergy to like how big a role the academy has come to play in in the arts and in shaping what kind of work gets made and what gets um, kind of talked about or and how we frame work. And I think there are probably a number of reasons for that, but I think part of that is just a product of the fact that artists need to make money, and getting a master's or a PhD and then getting a teaching position was probably the best way to both make money but also have some time to also make work, which, is essential to any artist having the capacity to do that. So I came up with this idea and I wrote this essay sort of pitching this argument that we could develop a system through which artists worked 20 hours a week in a variety of sort of civil sectors around the world, or sorry, around the city, partly because so many of the artists I know have so many skills that could apply to sort of many of the areas of sort of social infrastructure that need to be supported. And then they could spend 20 hours a week working in studio, making art in whatever capacity they wanted. And they would get paid 40 as if they'd worked a 40-hour work week. And so I sort of just wrote it and it got published through Public Parking. It's a Winnipeg-based online arts publication. And I then approached Latitude 53 and said, what if we applied for funding to try sort of a small pilot version of this and just see what happened? And they said, sure, which was amazing. And then we applied for funding through the AC and got it, enough to do a small version of this with four artists. So not a full week, but just sort of 1 day a week for four artists, and get them studio space. And so we picked four artists, all of whom none of whom I knew personally, and some of them I didn't know their work at all. Um, and they got positions at different sort of organizations around the city. And they spent a few hours there each week, and then they spent a few hours in studios at the Ortona Arts Hub, which the grant paid for as well. And they made work that it didn't have to be about their placement, but kind of inherently it ended up being a little bit about their placements as a result. Um, and they got paid for it. And then now the work is that they made is up at Latitude 53 up until the end of June. The four artists are Callum Beckford, Nicholas Hertz, Ken Ko, and Amy Lee.
That's incredible. I didn't know enough about that show. And that sounds, I mean, really like unique and new, but also like quite powerful. Like if that was to ever like take off, or if like people started to think like this way of thinking is beneficial, we could like work towards a wider scale implementation of this that could like literally change the arts in the city or in Canada, wherever the funding spread to. Is that, can you gauge it all? Like what do the high ups think of all this? Like are they for it, or do they think it's like it could happen and they don't want it to?
I have no idea. I don't know what sort of like responses have been from uh I guess it like other people in sort of organizations. So a bunch of people came to the opening and the response was really positive there, which was really nice. But I don't know how this could be sort of implemented at the moment on a broader scale. I am interested in there are lots of sort of other projects. The one that I think comes up a lot is there's a sort of a UBI for artists project being experimented with in Ireland. Um, but yeah, more than anything, I was curious to sort of experiment with sort of pushing outside the bounds of what we're used to uh, working with and seeing what could come of it. Partly because one of the things I'm a sort of a big proponent for is access to the arts, and I guess what I mean by that is not just the ability to go see work, but the ability to make it. I think it's incredibly valuable for people to get the opportunity to play and experiment with artistic practice and with just getting to make things, whether they ever show those things or whether they ever sort of reach a level or a desire to put them in a gallery or not. And so I think giving people time and space to get to do that is just like a healthy thing for society.
What about the like, how was the writing? Like the initial writing you did for the Winnipeg paper, how did people receive that? Or like can you gauge what people thought about that?
I got some like lovely feedback, and I think one of the nice things about putting something out into the internet these days is that it it kind of blows around and people encounter it at different times, and so the response kind of trickled in, and then because of this exhibition, more people have read it, which I'm grateful for, and yeah, I haven't had any like any critical feedback, which is very nice for anything you put online because I don't think everybody is that lucky. But I feel like I more than anything I get responses from people that are just like both acknowledging that it's worthwhile to think about other ways that things could be done, and then there's just the possibility that we could sort of tap into something, because I think a lot of people are having a similar feeling, and so I think translating that feeling into something tangible is something people respond to.
I didn't even know that it was possible to put something on the internet without negative feedback.
Well, maybe it's out there and I just haven't read it, but I do a fairly decent job of avoiding that. But Um,
Well, I mean, link that here for sure. I think it would be, I mean, in context to all this, but also just important for people to read that and start thinking about those things too. Because I feel like the idea of that is something that if people aren't thinking about it already, once they read it, then they'll think like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. Like, why? Were we not thinking about it before?
yeah, it's funny. The initial idea, like I was like, oh, what if we just went and cleaned up parks on Saturdays, and then also got to, and that ended up not being the way that it went. But I still think like I don't know. Part of my head is like, oh, I should just start a nonprofit that like can offer services to people or the city and find ways to fund it and hire artists to do that work and then also to get to make work whenever they wanted to. Because I think the other thing is that like by I think whatever work we inherently do influences the kind of art that we make in some form or another, right? And so I think the idea of kind of diversifying the things that are fueling or feeding indirectly feeding like artistic practice is also just interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean I love the idea like that you are like explained first, but the idea of like contributing, like cleaning up the city that you make art in return for being able to make art there, that's actually probably maybe a better application of it all. I like that the most.
Yeah, yeah, me I like it was such a random experiment that I'm amazed that it all kind of A went so well and we got funding for it, but I think it is still an idea that can be molded and shaped and adapted. So we'll see what comes from
Yeah, maybe in 400 years, like it takes so
it.
long for them to catch on to anything being a good idea, but maybe at some point that will become like a mainstay in institutions.
Yeah, well, I hope it doesn't take that long, but who knows?
Yeah, me either. I hope it's faster, but
In
mm,
addition to the show, I'll just shout out a few things that are coming up. There's a talk with the artist at Latitude, um, that is on July 6th. Let me triple confirm that. Uh, yeah, July 6th at 12:30 at Latitude. We're screening Perfect Days, this beautiful movie uh, at Metro on the 23rd of May at 3:15. And then there will be an online talk with an arts collective called Gendai on the 27th of June. Um, so all of those things.
that's incredible. I'll also plug all that. I'm so happy there is further programming because I always apologize to people on here whenever someone's like doing like a part of something that's kind of time sensitive, then I get them on here, but then it's already kind of happened already, so there
Yeah,
isn't
totally.
that much to like push on here. But it's incredible that there's three things that I mean. First of all, I'll be at all of them now that I know about them, but also I can advise people to show up to these. I'm sure that I'm not even kidding. This is probably one of the best conversations I've ever had in my life.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's so nice. I
like even outside the pod, like this is a really good Saturday morning. Like have to have a good weekend based on this, and I think other people are gonna love it, and then if they like you talking, they're gonna wanna like explore more of the stuff. So I think it's great. I'm so happy that there was extra stuff to promote at the end.
Oh, that's such a nice. I have to admit, I went out with we went for dinner with our neighbors last night, and I had one too many drinks. And I this morning was like, God, I hope I don't make an ass of myself on this podcast. And so for you to say that feels nice.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I like I always say. I'm sure we could talk about all this stuff for hours. It's been so long for us to do a second. I hope later we can do a third and a fourth and a fifth.
Yeah, I mean, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. But beyond that, I'll let you get back to your headache and en- enjoy the rest of the long weekend. Good luck with all the stuff coming up, and congrats on the show. It's a wonderful idea that I hope people see the power of it in less than 400 years.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Thank you so much for having me, for asking me back. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Enjoy anything you need to enjoy. Enjoy it. And obviously, well, I always say keep in touch, but I guess we are in touch. So
Yeah.
keep that up.
Yeah, ditto.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye. Thanks so much. Thank you for such a lovely conversation. Maybe I'll do that again. Thanks for such a lovely conversation. Have a great Saturday.
I will. I'll try.